I'm going to sandwich a brief summary of my paper in between a front end that gives you the context of Sacramento and what we've done there in short, and then closes with just a couple of comments that relate to the good discussion areas that we've been covering. The Sacramento region is about 2.4 million people. We have 22 cities and 6 counties. We're at the very northern end of that Central Valley. We've figured out over the last couple of decades that actually our primary economic relationship, and this was with some help from Armando's Metro 2050 project, is really to the west, to the Bay Area, not so much to the south of the balance of the Central Valley, but we still share a lot of their geography and economy. And our terrain is very flat. We don't have any natural growth boundaries, mountains or water. So flat land as far as the eye can see. A hill in Sacramento is about 10 feet tall, and that's not a joke. And politically, in American red state, blue state terms, my 31-member board of mayors and county supervisors is about 3-to-1 red to blue. And our growth pattern has been classic sprawl over the decades of the 70s and 80s and 90s. So that's the context in which the much younger man moved from Portland to Sacramento to work on smart growth in the northern end of the Central Valley. So about a decade ago, we adopted our board after a 2 or 3 year long, very intensive information-based and citizen democracy-based regional scenario planning effort, what we called our blueprint. And we did it on our own terms. It was before there were state or federal regulations or even nudges. We did it on our own terms, and the board unanimously figured out that the way they were growing was going to lead them off the cliff, and that they needed to not just change a little bit, they needed to change a lot. Our leading mayor, actually of the city of West Sacramento, describes it as one of the rare instances of disruptive planning, where major change really happened from the bottom up. And so my take on 375, not surprisingly, is a little more glass half full rather than Bill's glass half empty. And I really do think that there's an underpinning assumption over lots of the comments we've made that if you don't have a strong top-down federal state working its way down to the local level, that you really don't have a way to make major change happen, because you have to sort of force the local people to get out of their parochial mindset and do something that they don't perceive to be in their self-interest. And I think our experience really totally belies that presumption. If you can't work where all politics is local, to go with Speaker O'Neill, if you can't win the hearts and minds at the local level, you're never going to make major change happen on a sustained basis. That's the assertion of my experience. So our board adopted a voluntary growth plan. We have no land use authority to dictate to our members that they change it, but they all unanimously endorsed the plan. We intended to implement it from the day we started doing the work. We were very serious about implementation. One of the things my board told me to do to get it implemented was to do the impossible and go across the street to the state capitol and get them to change CEQA, the big state environmental quality law, because it actually worked to thwart good growth principles. It disincentivized infill development because it made it look high density. It made it look more impactful than low density. It's a really bad. It may be an okay environmental law in some respects. It's a bad law and from an urban planner's standpoint. So we had the benefit that the president of the Senate for 6 years was from the Sacramento region, and so we had close relationships with him. And one night at a birthday party of a mutual friend, he said, "What can I help you to do to implement your blueprint?" And I said, "Well, you can help us change CEQA to make it incentivize it instead of disincentivize it." And he said, "Okay, let's do it." So that was one of the taproots for SB 375 under the umbrella, as Bill described, of AB 32. The other was the state's leading environmentalist, at least from a state advocacy point of view, a lawyer named Tom Adams, who became educated about the three-legged stool that Bill showed you and realized that the climate was not going to be saved unless we could reduce driving in addition to cleaner fuels and better engines. And so he got religion and built up a knowledge about how regional transportation land use planning could help meet the goals of AB 32. And so it was really Tom coming at Senator Steinberg from one direction and our agency coming at him from another, and we eventually started by arguing it out and eventually worked it out, what I think is a pretty innovative law. So let me give you my quick summary of Bill's good graphic. It is a complicated law, but in some respects it's quite simple. And there's an important role for the state. It's not a state plan, but there's a very important role for the state. The California Air Resources Board, which is a very powerful agency, not just in California but in the country, establishes a target for greenhouse gas reduction from the transportation sector in 2020 and 2035. All of the 18 MPOs in the region and they're in the state, and the four largest, Sacramento, San Diego, San Francisco, and LA, comprise 85% of the population of the state. So you can get to most of the state through those four entities. We either must meet that target. We do have the ability to conclude on our own that it's not, quote, feasible to do so, and to do an alternative scenario in which we have to analyze the impacts and disclose what it would take to actually meet the standard. So you could, with a straight face, say, I could say to us with a straight face to my conservative board, you know, this is not a government mandate. It's voluntary in that sense. But I got to tell you, as I said in my paper, all of the 18 MPOs treat the targets that were set by us, by the Air Resources Board, as if they were regulatory targets. Nobody is going to adopt a plan that doesn't meet that target. And we're required under both state and federal law to adopt plans that are realistic. These can't just be visionary fictional plans. And so there is, even though there's nothing in the law that says the general plans and the SCSs must be consistent, if you look at the three plans that have been adopted in Sacramento, LA, and San Diego, there's a lot of agreement between the general plans and the SCSs, not complete agreement. And in the case of the Los Angeles region, they deviate the most, and it's actually a sign of the power of the law that they garnered enough courage to, on their board, unanimously adopt an SCS that they fully understood was not consistent with all of their general plans, and that it was going to take a lift on their part in many cases to get those plans in conformance in order to actually deliver their greenhouse gas savings. So the quick points from my paper I just want to highlight are, it's a good example of how a planning-based law can have some oomph to it, and not just a classic regulatory-based law. It's making a difference. If you look at the plans of the three regions that have adopted so far, and the Bay Area will in 4 months, all of them exceed the targets that the Air Resources Board set for us. All of them posit much more compact, higher density development patterns in the next 25 years than in our prior 25 years. They're all high performing plans. The LA region is probably the biggest success story. An 18 million population region went through a complete, in my opinion, transformation in their thinking about smart growth as a result of Senate Bill 375. Second lesson is the power of performance-based planning. We had discussion about evidence-based planning. We all know there's many metrics you need to meet, but it was interesting to live through this. When you have a single metric that you need to plan for, it makes you a more focused, sophisticated planner. We went over and over and over scenarios trying to hit that metric while still balancing all of the other needs that we had to meet, both politically with our local cultures and the other environmental regulations. It had a lot, it introduced much more focus and rigor into the planning system than we had had in our prior plans. There's a big story about the increase in capacity and interest and power of regional planning that's come out of SB 375. I think there's a credible argument that the most enlivened planning in the U.S. over the last year or two has come out of California because of the growth of regionalism and the sophistication of these regional planning agencies that was stimulated by this plan. And I have to say to Richard, where's Richard Whitman, the fact that so much of Negative's planning, or Oregon's planning early on was trying to not be like California, it's a matter of no small pride that you also point out that you then stole our climate change law so that you could figure out how to go to the next level. So I think I took, as a former Oregonian, I took great pride in that. And I guess I want to close by saying I do think, particularly if the president is reelected, that his Sustainable Community Initiative, which we have reason to think is a serious federal initiative clear to the president's desk, which really is a region-based, cut across the silos, do integrated planning, do performance-based planning. All of this mindset is very serious to the Obama administration. They've put very, very capable people at the highest levels of DOT, HUD, and EPA. It's a place-based mindset, and we've had, I'll just close, I'm out of time, but I'll just close by saying we've had a good discussion about boundaries and boxes and how states and in some respects even nation states don't necessarily conform to that. Neither do local government boundaries, but regions largely do. Those regions exist because empirically that's how the market economies grew, right? And so if you look around the country, those regions are there for a reason, because that's how economic life is carried out. There are often natural systems that conform to that, and so I think that there's a future in which a lot more attention is placed on regional scale planning and action, and I think the right role for the states in our country, the states and the federal government, is to do much better at defining performance standards, linking financing and regulatory flexibility to high-performing regions that meet those standards. And I think that's one way, given our particular context and politics in the U.S., as planners, we have a way forward to keep being progressive and being a leading force for change and not just sort of hunkering down and waiting for our time to come again. Thank you.